now continuing on with exercises in WPF. What we're going to do is focus now on styles, windows, and ultimately LINQ, and using LINQ to display dynamic data. So we have 3 exercises here. Let's start with the first exercise. Exercise 1 states, write a WPF with 2 columns using stack views. Column 1 will have a stack view with 3 labels that say mouse over to change color. Column 2 will have a stack view with 3 rectangles that by default are purple. It will also have 3 radio buttons that with the text red, blue, and green. Use styles as follows. So style for labels will be a width of 250, height of 100, font size of 15, margin of 10, both horizontal and vertical content alignment as center. Style for rectangles will be width of 500, height of 100, margin of 10, purple by default. Use triggers as follows. Rectangles will have the color selected by a set of radio buttons. And labels will change the orange text, the text to orange when the mouse is over, and black when the mouse is not mousing over those labels. All right, so let's get started. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new project. And a little too far, we're going to do WPF app. I'm going to call this W5P2 exercise 1. And give it home. All right. So I'm going to use the GUI version here, or the WYSIWYG version, the designer, in order to generate a few things, and then we will move on to XAML. We'll be interchanging the two. Just going to pop this out, set up my workspace here. Okay, so we're ready to go. In fact, actually, no, I'll start with XAML just to make things easier, because inside my grid, I'll just jump right in and create my stack panel. Now this stack panel is going to have 2 columns. So orientation should be horizontal. Okay, so that's my closing stack panel there. Within it, we'll say another stack panel. And we know that stack panels by default are vertical, so I won't bother with orientation. Within this first column of the stack panel, which will have 3 rows in the internal stack panel for column 1, the left column, we're going to have 3 labels. So first label, I'm going to say the X name is, we'll call it just LBL1. I'm going to keep the labels very generic for today. Content, we'll say mouse over to change color. And I will leave the rest for now. There's more to it, but I'm going to leave it for now. All right, we'll say label X name equals LBL2. Again, content mouse over to change color. And label X name LBL3, content mouse over to change color. All right, now, you know what? Let's just build out the stack views first. So let's create our second stack panel for the next column, and then we'll compare and contrast the styles that we're getting to. So I'm going to say another stack panel. There's my closing stack panel there. Let's get rid of some of the extra white spaces there. All right, that error is meaningless. Let's just get rid of it. And we're going to have 3 rectangles in the second stack panel. So column 2 of our outer stack panel. And say rectangle, X name is, we'll call it rect1. And the rest, well, we'll say stroke black, just to make sure that we have an outer line so we actually see the rectangles. All right, that's good enough. Do the same for the other two. We'll say X name is rect2, stroke black. Rectangle, X name, we'll say rect3, stroke black. All right, now below the three rectangles, we're going to have three radio buttons. So I'll actually just type it out. You could drag and drop these things. So you could have dragged and dropped everything yourself, but I'll just type it out today. So radio button, I'll say X name is RB red. We'll say content, so the text for the radio button will say red. And now this is important. We need to group the three radio buttons we're about to create into one group. So we'll say group name will be, we'll call it RB colors, so that they are linked. All right, we'll say again, radio button, X name, call it RB blue, content blue, group name, RB colors, radio button, X name, RB green, content green, group name, RB colors. Okay. So now we have our we have everything here in play, but let's see what it looks like in design mode. Now you can see this is not really what we want. We want to have something a little more spacious. Hey, where are the rectangles? Exactly. So this is where styles come into play, because I could actually define the characteristics for all of these items one at a time, over and over and over again, just repeating myself over and over and over again. But instead, we're going to take advantage of styles. All right, and we're going to define styles for each of these. We're going to start with the labels. I'm going to do this inside code. So we'll starting with the labels, going back to our XAML code file. All right, just after the window declaration, just before grid, we're going to start with defining a style. So we're going to open up a tag, window.resources. There's the closing window.resources. All right. Inside of it, we're going to start with our first style. So we'll open up a style. Say X key is, we're going to call this label style. All right. Target type is important. What are we targeting here? We're targeting labels. We want this style to affect labels. All right. There's our closing style tag. Now let's set the properties. So first setter. So first property, we'll say width. We're going to set the width to a value of 250. All right. Now the second property we're going to set, so setter property, we're going to say height. We're going to hard code it to a value of 100. All right. Now setter property, let's set the font size to a value of 15. Now let's set the property of margin. Give it a margin. It's a little gap between boxes here. Value of 10. Setter. Say property Horizontal. Now we want, now you have, again, as usual, when you're dealing with horizontal alignment, we want horizontal content alignment to be a value of center. Finally, setter, property of vertical content alignment to be a value of center. All right. Now, how do we apply these resources to our three labels? Well, if we scroll down, we see our labels right there. All we need to do is make a slight modification to the three labels by saying style equals, now we'll open up a set of curly brackets. We're going to say static resource label style. Okay, we'll do the same for all three. Style static resource label style. All right, style static resource label style. All right, that's it. We have these properties we've set for labels. We just apply this line of code, this section of code, to all three labels. Now let's look at our designer and see what happens. And I can see our three labels have changed. All right, and you can see that there is a margin between the two labels as well. And so now we have our labels properly designed. Now the next step is to move on to the rectangles. So we'll jump back to our XAML code file. Let's create some styles for our rectangles. So I'm going to open up a new style block. We'll say X key is rect style. We'll say target type rectangle. Close that up. Now let's start with the first setter, and we'll say property width. We'll say value. We'll set the to be 500. Property height, value 100. Setter property, we'll say margin, value of 10. And finally, setter property fill will be value. We'll fill it with purple. All right, so we've just set three properties here. All right, for our three rectangles. All right, now let's move back to our designer to see what's happened. Nothing yet, because we haven't applied the style to our three rectangles. So let's scroll down a little bit. There's our three rectangles. All we have to say now is style is static resource. So we'll say style equals static resource rect style. Style static resource rect style. Style static resource rect style. Now have a look. Now let's see what's happened. Much better. We now have three rectangles of color purple. We have our three labels. We have our three rectangles, and we have three radio buttons that have yet to be put to work. So what you're thinking, okay, so how do we set it up so that every time you click on something, we update one of these? Well, we could set up an event handler. We could use some C# code. We're not going to use C# code here. We're going to use XAML to do the work for us, to cut down on the work in our case. So I'm going to switch back to our XAML code file. And we're going to introduce triggers. And I'll start with the labels. All right. So let's go back to our style for our labels. All right. We're going to continue on with the style block. And what we're going to do is introduce a trigger. So before the closing style tag, we're going to add a little bit of space there and open up and say style.triggers. There's our closing triggers tag. We're going to introduce our first trigger to be trigger property is mouse over. Here it is. We're going to say value true. This is like an if statement indirectly. All right, think of this as your if statement, but in XAML. So we'll say if it's true, we're going to say, actually, sorry, the slash is not correct. So let me just make a correction there. We'll put a closing trigger. That's better. And between the two trigger tags, we're going to say setter property foreground. We'll set the text value to orange. All right. Now if somebody mouses away, so trigger, say property is mouse over, value is false. So think of it as another if statement. We're going to say setter property foreground value black. So we'll return it back to black. All right. We don't have to do anything else. Give it a try. Actually, we have enough to run at this point. So let's run, because we look back at our designer, nothing's really changed. The work is in running this. So let's run it. Forgive my computer being extra slow today. There we go. Slowly but surely. All right. So you mouse over the different labels, mouse away. The text has changed to orange and changes back to black. All right. Now let's apply this to the rectangles. So what we're going to do is we're going to scroll down to our style block for the rectangles. I'm going to continue on there and introduce another style triggers block. And this time we're not going to use a trigger. We're going to use something called a data trigger. So data trigger actually relies on other elements in order for it to take an action, whereas the trigger on its own relies on just a user action on that particular element. But here we're relying on a user action to another element to take action in order to do something. So we're going to be using a data trigger to do this. So what I'm going to say is data trigger. And now we're going to say binding, some brackets, and say binding again. Element name will be RB red, our radio button red, comma path is checked. Path equals is checked. All right. Now what this means is that it's going to check the radio button RB red to see if that's highlighted or if that's checked, essentially. Okay. We're going to check to see if it's checked by saying value is true. All right. Now, if that is, then what we're going to do is say setter property fill. We're going to set it to be a value of red. All right. Now let's apply this to blue and green. So we'll say data trigger again. We'll say binding is, and then binding element name RB blue, path is checked, value true. All right, we'll say setter property fill value blue. Data trigger binding, we'll say binding element name RB green, path is checked, value true. All right, and then finally setter property fill value, and this time I'm going with green. All right, and that's it. You have enough to run. We've just added some triggers to our 3 rectangles. Now, the trick is to go ahead and run this. See it in action. Create app host error. This is getting a little bit annoying. Let's create app host errors. Could you say expect to hit run, and it should run. Let's try running again. And go. So mousing over, nothing. Click on red. There it is. Red, blue, green. All right. Now you'll notice no C# code was written. This is all XAML. And this is exercise 1. So let's move on to exercise 2. So now exercise 2 states that we're going to create a WPF app that starts off with a window called login window. Login window will have an entry for username and password. If the user clicks cancel, the app closes. If the user enters the correct info, we're going to hard code a username of Jim Kirk and a password called enterprise. And if that is successful, main window is launched with a background of Azure and a title welcome. All right, so we're going to start off by doing that. So we're going to create a fresh new project. So just Control-Shift-N, as I've already done here. I'm going to use a WPF app template. I'm going to call it W5P2 exercise 2. Give it a home. All right, and so we have our workspace generating here. So let's start with creating a new window. We have main window here, but we're not going to use main window. What we're going to do is instead have another window, call it login window, and we're going to have that launch first. So let's right click on our project here, W5P2 exercise 2, right click. We're looking for add. We could just say add window. Instead of new item we'll have to fish through and look for window. Thankfully, some of the most common stuff that we ever want to use is here. So we're going to say window, WPF there. and it's already highlighted WPF. Again, Visual C# items. If you have multiple languages installed instead of just Visual C#, like VB, C++, and so on, you want to make sure that this says Visual C#. Otherwise, choose the correct language on this side here. What we have here is correct. So I'm just going to call it login window, and it'll autocomplete the file extension for us, and just hit add. And it's thinking. And there's our login window. And the XAML's down there. I'm going to actually pop that out and put it side by side, just so we have... Well, there. Actually, I like this view even better, where it's actually just one common view. So anyway, what I want to do is I want to shrink down this window. It's just way too big. Let's click on document outline, make sure window is highlighted. Now I can go ahead and shrink this thing down. All right, it's a good size. I'm going to forego all the style and designs that we typically have been talking about right now, and just focus on just generating a simple login window. Of course, you can format this properly on your own time for extra practice. So start by dragging some labels over, and this will just say username, and we'll drag another label. This will say password. Put a colon for consistency. There we go. And then we need a couple of text. We need a text box. All right. That. And I'm going to call this text box TB user. All right. And let's grab, now be careful. Okay, so one thing that you may want to notice, just in case you make this mistake, there is a distinction between text block and text box. I dragged a text box. If you accidentally dragged a text block, you will probably see no box around here, and very tricky to do any user entry. You probably have trouble with this thing. So make sure you drag the text box. If you're having trouble with your username box and when you're running this, it's probably because you accidentally dragged text block. I made that mistake too, and I'm like, what's going on? And then I realized after the fact, oh, I accidentally dragged a text block by accident. So just a heads up, make sure you dragged text box. That's what we're looking for. All right, now we need a password box. So I'm going to search for that. There's password box. Just gonna throw it there. Just line it up there. Oops, oh, okay. Line it up. There we go. I'm gonna call this PB pass. All right. And now we need 2 buttons. So I'm gonna throw a couple of buttons on. One right there. Should be using styles. Just gonna eyeball it because we're focusing on a different exercise right now. Looks good enough. But yes, of course, the right way to do things would be just to make sure we have a style and everything's organized and nice and neat. But we're not going to do that. So first button here, we'll call this btn login, and content will be login. All right. And then the second one will be btn cancel, and content will be cancel. All right. So we have those. And let's double click on each to generate a corresponding event handler. All right, so we have btn cancel. We have btn login. Okay, btn cancel is simple. We're just going to close the application. So let's just say this.close. All right, and that's it for cancel. Now for login, what we're going to do is actually have it launch main window. if it's correct entry. All right. So what we want to do is we're going to hard code our entry here. Of course, you go a lot more extravagant than what we're doing, but just for a simple exercise sake, we'll just say private string user equals Jim Kirk and private string pass equals enterprise. All right, so I have username, password. Now what we're going to do is we're going to check and see if they match. So we'll say if user equals TV user dot text and double and pass equals pb pass dot password. All right, then we can go ahead and launch. Well, I'll come back to that in a moment. I think I can scroll up a bit more just so it's easier to expand. Else, let's get the else out of the way. The else is simply a message box that'll say message box dot show, and we'll say incorrect username or password. We'll say login error. We'll say line there, message box button dot OK and message box image dot error. All right, that's it for that. Now, if we want to launch a new window, which we're going to do in our if block here, what we have to do is instantiate that new window. So we already have main window defined. We have main window.xaml. It was automatically generated. Let's just use that. We'll say main window, call it m equals new main window, instantiated. We'll set some features. We'll say m.background equals brushes.azure. And we'll say m.title equals welcome. And finally, m.show. All right, now let's give this a run. And what's peculiar here is that we were working on our login window, and this does not look like our login window. It doesn't have the text welcome. It doesn't even have blue or azure as the color. What does this tell you? This tells you that by default, when you create a project, main window is auto-generated and main window is launched by default. So we have one more change to make. We actually have to tell the application that we want a login window to launch, not main window. It's an easy change. So if we look here, we have app.xaml. We talked about app.xaml when we want to add a dictionary of resources. We want to add that file. We added it under application resources last time. But you'll notice inside app.xaml that it says startup URI main window.xaml. Well, this should actually be login window.xaml. Once you make this change, now login window launches by default. So now I can give it a run again. And you'll see, here we go, login window launches by default. If I hit cancel, so we know that cancel works. Let's launch it a second time. All right, now let's give a username and password, Jim Kirk. All right, if I just hit login with no password, here we go, incorrect username or password. So there we go, that works. Let's fix that by saying enterprise. And it launches our secondary window. Now, let me show something to you. Here's our log. We've logged into our window. This is presumably our home page, but I still have access to login window. Now, from a user's perspective, does this make sense? No, we shouldn't really have access to the previous window when we launch a window. In fact, we should. Maybe there's a reason for it. Maybe you want to have previous access to another window, but this is not really the application in our case. We want to prevent access to the previous window until we close this window. So what we need to do is make one more change. Let's go back to loginwindow.xaml.cs. We said here m.show. This should actually be m.show dialog. All right. Now, if we do it this way, this basically says, so this is a show versus show dialog. Show just says launch the new window, but you can still have access to the previous window. And show dialog means launch the new window, but you have to finish working on the new window and close it before you can have access to the previous window. All right. If you look at messagebox.show, this is counterintuitive. All right, because messagebox.show, you are forced to interact with the message box before you can go back to the window behind it. So you're forced into it. It is coded in a way that it is doing a show dialog, I guess, behind the scenes that, yes, you're dealing with that way. But from a naming perspective, it is inconsistent, and I can see the confusion in having to deal with messagebox.show in this case. So let's run it again. All right, let's bring our login window again. So Jim Kirk, not Kirk, but Kirk. Enterprise, hit login. Here's our new window. I have no access to the previous window. All right, till I close that, cancel. Now I have access. All right, so that's exercise 2. Now let's move on to exercise 3. So now let's continue with exercise 3. So exercise 3 basically stays, we're going to continue on with this exercise, exercise 2. We're now going to incorporate LINQ and Collections. We're going to create a custom class called crew, which will have the strings ID for name and ID, name, rank, starship, and home planet. We're going to hard code 5 officers into a list of these crew objects. We're going to display all items in a list view using the LINQ and using a LINQ query and bind all the data. We're going to add text boxes for all the items to add, update, and add, update, and delete buttons for this. So we're going to have a full-fledged management system for the crew. All right, so let's jump into this. The first thing we're going to do is add a new class. So I'm going to right-click on the solution, add a class. I'm just going to call it crew. .cs will be added automatically. Again, Visual C# item. And it's thinking, there's crew. So let's start by defining all our getters and setters and our one constructor to save us some time and our fields. So private int underscore ID. I know I said that ID will be a string, but it actually makes more sense as an int. Private string underscore name, private string underscore rank, private string underscore starship, private string underscore home planet. All right, let's create a constructor. But before we do, let's do getters and setters for all of these guys here. We're going to say public int ID. We'll say get, and then return underscore ID set underscore D equals value. Do that for the other 4 items. So we'll say public string name. Say get and then return underscore name. We'll say set underscore name equals value. Right, continuing on, we have public string rank, and scroll up and say get return underscore rank, and we'll say set underscore rank equals value. Say public string starship. We'll say get return underscore starship, set underscore starship equals value. Finally, home planet, public string home planet. We'll say get return underscore home planet. Finally, set home planet equals value. All right, so we have our getters and setters for all 5 fields. All right, the only thing remaining is I want to add a constructor that will allow us to pass all of these items at the same time, just to save ourselves some time here. So what we're going to say is public crew will pass in int I, string n, string r, string s, and string h. And we'll say ID equals I, name equals n. We'll say rank equals r, starship equals s, and home planet equals h. All right, so we have our crew object, really simple. Now we're going to apply it. All right, and what we'll do is we'll start off inside main window.xaml.cs and just initiate some information here, or instantiate some information here, and set up our list before we get into our XAML GUI and add the stuff that we need. So I'm going to switch over to main window.xaml.cs. We're going to hard code a list. So I'm going to say private list of crew. We're going to call it people equals new list of crew. All right, I'm going to hard code 5 people. So I'm going to say people dot add and then new crew. We'll say index 0. We'll say Jean-Luc Picard. Use new lines to separate. We'll say he's a captain. And we'll say he's on the Enterprise. Conflicting worlds for all you Trekkies out there, I know, but I just wanted to mix things up a bit. We'll say he's from Earth. All right. Now I'm just going to copy and paste rather than type so much. So now people.add crew for 1, and next one will be Worf. He's a lieutenant commander. I really don't know if I correctly spelled lieutenant commander. Well, lieutenant at least, so forgive me for that. We'll say he's on Deep Space Nine, because that really was the better Trek series. I hope I didn't start off any wars there by saying that. And we'll say he's from Kronos. I don't know if that's historically accurate in the Trek world, but I'm just guessing. Anyway, people.add now the third one. we'll say Nog, he's an ensign. And of course, if you really don't care for Star Trek, you can change this up to be anything you want. You don't have to follow all these names if you want. Just make stuff up if you need to. Say he's an ensign. He is on the Defiant. And he's from Ferenginar. Alright. Oh, I forgot to increment the crew there. So that should be 2. This should be 3. And we're going to say Spock. Oh, really mixing things up here. He is an ambassador at this point. Sure, we'll say Enterprise. I can't think of anything. We'll say Vulcan. And finally, for entry number 4, we'll say Jadzia Dax. She is a lieutenant, I think. Lieutenant. Hopefully I spelled that correct. And she is on Deep Space 9. And her home planet is Trill. Okay, we have our list. Now, before I go further, let's actually jump to our main window and start adding stuff. So we'll switch over to main window.xaml. I'm going to actually do a mix of XAML code and drag and drop. I'm going to start off with defining my grid to be 2 columns, but I'm going to actually have, so I'll start with the column definitions. So search for column. There's column definitions. And I'm going to add a column definition there by saying that my first column will be 2 star. Add a second one that says 1 star. I want the first column to be wider than the second one. Let's drag a stack panel. Actually, I'm going to do some code at the same time. So we have here column definition of that. And now I'll start with a stack panel. And I'm going to say grid.column. I haven't really picked on grid.column in a while, so let's bring it in. Grid.column of 0. So first column. Give it a margin of 10, just so we have a little bit of a gap. All right, we know by default stack panels are vertical, so I don't need to do anything for orientation. I'm going to add a second stack panel. And I'll say grid.column will be 1. So the second column there, again, margin of 10. All right, and we have that there. What we're going to do is we're going to have a list box. So let's actually do it in the visual world. So I'm going to drag and drop a list box and see how that goes. If I have to, there it is actually, so we can see that the grids are laying out nicely there. So there we go, we have our list box stretched out nice, a little bit of a margin, perfect. What we want to do is we're going to name this list box LST crew. All right, horizontal alignment, so let's try horizontal content alignment will be stretch. There we go. And item source and selection change. But I'm going to actually type this in instead of searching for it. So I'll switch back to XAML code. And let's actually add a little bit more to this. I'm going to use a new line. Just readability, we'll say item source equals binding. This is a key thing. where because we're not going to hard code our data, we're going to have it be dynamic coming from a source. In this case, our source is going to be our list that we just created. And one last thing, I'm going to add an event handler to LST crew. I'm going to go to my lightning bolt there, and I'm looking for selection changed. So let's scroll down and look for selection changed. There we go, LST crew selection change. We'll come back to this. Let's go back to our XAML code. All right, so that's it for our list box. All right, now on the second column, we're going to add, actually I'll just type it in. Well, instead of dragging and dropping, we'll just say label content is name, so just a hard-coded label, and a text box, and we'll say x name is tb name. All right, and close that up. I'm actually going to copy and paste, just change as needed. We already have our stack panel, so it's just going one above the other. All right, so we have your name. The second one will be rank. This will be TB rank. This one will be starship, TB starship. And finally, home planet, TB home planet. We'll just call it home, just to shorten things up. Now we need 3 buttons. In fact, let's just have a quick peek at our main window. Yep, we got name, rank, starship, home planet. We just need three buttons down here, then we can actually get to work. So let's add some buttons. So we'll say button x name is btn add. Content is add new. I'll add the click event handler in a minute. I'm just gonna let it generate. Say button x name is btn update. Content equals update. Finally, button x name will be btn delete. Content delete. All right, so we have our 3 buttons. Just start by also going to our properties. Our lightning bolt's already open. We have btn add there at the top under name. Let's just double click on click. So we just generated our btn add click. Let's go back to main window.xaml, the code again. Click on update, btn update, double click on click. So there's btn update click. Finally delete, double click on click. And there's btn delete. All right, so we have our event handlers. Let's have a quick peek at the designer. Everything looks in order. So we're ready to begin our work in the C# code. Now let's first start by just getting our list view to display our people. So let's move back to the CS file from main window. And we'll start back into our constructor where we already initialized our 5 people. Now, all we have to do is let's introduce some LINQ code to select our people, our names in particular, and fish those names into our list box. So we're going to say var names equals from PEO in people select PEO.name. All right. then we'll say lst crew dot data context equals names. That's all we need to do. That'll fish everything from our LINQ query into our list box. We now have enough to run. So let's give this a run. Okay, let's see. Oops. Of course, I forgot some brackets there under my declaration. I'm surprised I didn't notice it before. Okay, giving it a shot again. Still thinking, still compiling. Come on. You can do it. All right, so let's log in. Jim Kirk, Enterprise. And it generated the window. Here we go. We have our 5 users right there. Now, let's set up so that when we click on one of these, we populate the text boxes. So that's our next step. And that's why I had you guys generate the selection changed event handler, because we're going to use the selection changed event handler to populate this. Now, what we'll do here is first get the selected index. Okay, the index number from 0 to n-1. And that's why I purposely named my IDs from 0 to n-1 as well, just to line them up. So I'm going to say int I equals lstcrew.selectedIndex. That tells me the index number that was clicked on. So the item number that was clicked on from 0 to n-1. Now I'm going to feed that into a LINQ query. So var selected crew equals from PEO in people. We'll say where PEO.id equals I select PEO. All right, that's it. Now it's going to return back one item in this case, but that item is an array. So we need to fish it out. So I'm going to do it inside a for each loop as opposed to anything better. So let's see. We'll say for each var s in selected crew. We'll say tb name dot text equals s dot name, tb rank dot text equals s dot rank. We'll say tb starship dot text that didn't autocomplete nicely, so I want to make sure I got it right. There we go. I did misspell it. Oh well, I'm not going back to change it. Equals s dot starship. Finally, tb home dot text equals s dot home planet, that is. All right, that's enough to give it a run, and let's see what happens. We should see things change. So let's drag it over. We'll log in again. And we generate our second window. And as you can see, our text fields are populating. All right, now let's move on to add, update, and delete. So what we want to do is, we'll scroll down to the add. We want to make sure there's no empty input. All right, just so, I mean, they're text boxes, so I don't have to worry about garbage input, but at least empty input for now. So we'll just say if tbname.text equals empty string, or tbrank.text equals empty string, or tbstarship.text equals empty string, or tbhome.text equals empty string. All right, then we'll just do a message box dot show saying no text box can be empty. We'll say error. We'll do a message box button dot OK and a message box image of error. Okay. Else, we are going to add to our all right. So what we would say is people.add, say new crew, and our ID will be people.count because it will just insert the ID automatically. Then we'll say tbname.text, tbrank.text, tbstarship.text, tbhome.text. All right, so we've inserted a new item onto this into our collection. Now all we have to do is rerun the LINQ query just to update our list box. So we'll say var names equals from PEO in people select PEO.name, and then fish that into LST crew.data context equals names. All right, and that's it. Let's just start adding people now. All right, so we'll log in again. Jim Kirk, Enterprise. All right, we know that we can add. Let's add McCoy. Rank is Doctor. Starship Enterprise, we'll leave that. Home planet Earth. Hit add. We see that McCoy is there. Now let's just blank out the input, just one. Just hit add. No text box can be empty. So we have our little error checking there as well. All right, so we have add. Let's focus on update now. Okay, so we'll scroll down to our update. All right, now what we're going to do with update is instantiate a fresh crew object and replace it inside our people list. So we'll say crew C equals new crew, and what we're going to do is we're going to say that the ID number is LST crew.selected index. All right, tbname.text, tbrank.text, tbstarship.text, and finally tbrank home.text. All right. So we instantiate our crew object. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to replace people at lstcrew.selectedIndex with our new crew object. Now all we do is just rerun our LINQ. So say var names equals from PEO in people select PEO.name. And fish that into lstcrew.dataContext. All right, Jim Kirk, enterprise, log in. All right, let's see here, all of these. Now let's replace Jadzia Dax with Esri Dax, because if you followed Deep Space Nine, you know that she was killed off in the final season. Let's make her an ensign. Instead of Deep Space Nine, let's say that she is from the Defiant. And let's just, for change's sake, let's make it a lowercase trill, just so we can see the difference there. We'll say update. All right. Now you see Esri Dax has been updated. If I switch to the other ones and I come back to Esri, you see that all of our information for Esri has changed as well. All right, final thing, delete. This should be a lot easier than the other ones, but all we have to do now is say people. Autocomplete's just not my friend right now. People dot remove at, and we'll say lstcrew dot selected index, and we'll say var names equals from PEO in people select PEO.name. We'll fish that into lstcrew.dataContext equals names. Now I'm going to add one more thing. I'm going to say for int I equals 0, I is less than people.count. I think I just can't spell people today. I plus plus. I'm going to say people of I dot ID equals I. Why am I doing this? Well, just to account for the scenario of, say I delete one of the middle objects in this list, but our IDs are going to be, like say I delete the object with ID 2, and I go back to playing around with everything else, you'll all of a sudden have objects 0, 1, and then 3 and 4, and it messes things up, especially when trying to select other objects and modify them. It totally throws everything off. And if you want to understand what I'm talking about, comment out these two lines of code, the for loop and the people.id equals I. See what happens for yourself. This is just a quick fix just to make things look nice. So I'm reordering the IDs. All right, one final run. All right, try again. All right, so we'll say Jim Kirk, enterprise, login. All right, now I want to delete Worf. Just don't tell him I said that. I deleted that. Notice that it's reordered things. And I can click and verify that everything still works nicely. I can delete Spock. All right, and I can see that everything is still there. All right, And so that, in a nutshell, was a larger case example of just managing data in collections, and then being able to insert, update, and delete data into our collection through a list view through some WPF. The next step will be to actually use a real database to do all of this stuff, and that will be coming in a future topic. But for now, we've handled a lot of things as exercise. Now it's up to you to go ahead and practice these things, expand upon it, grow upon it, and see where you can take it from here.